What happens in the sky affects life down here on Earth. The Celestial Compass shows you how and guides your way with astrology you can use from professional astrologer Kathy Beal. Every episode features her light-hearted, practical forecasts and navigational tips, blended with humor, optimism, and a love of patterns, symbolism, and pop culture references. Kathy translates technicalities into concepts that apply to real life. You'll learn how the current moment ties to where we've been, from the recent past to cycles that last happened years ago, and get a look at where we're heading. And much more, from special topics to special guests. The Celestial Compass, enlightening, entertaining, and empowering. Here's your host, Kathy Beal.
Greetings, Earthlings. This is Kathy Beal of EmpowermentUnlimited.net with the last Celestial Compass show of 2020. And in keeping with the end of the year, we're going to take a long distance view at where we've been and a long distance view of where we may be heading with some specific navigational tips on how to get there. But first, a brief look at where we are right now. The astrology for the rest of the month is as complex as the entire year has been. You probably have noticed it's not your ordinary holiday season. There are influences driving us into letting go of things that are dead, taking relationships off life support, simplifying, streaming, paring back, streamlining like crazy. And this is going to be the most intense over the Christmas holiday weekend. I've had people sending me messages telling me that they are freaking out over this. We've been living through this kind of influence really all year long. And this is just another round of testing the structures in your life, watching things collapse that have been teetering, restructuring some agreements, and stripping things down to what is absolutely the most important to you. And then at the end of the year, the very end of the year, everything starts to soften and feel sweeter and gentler and more full of hope as Jupiter, the guy that ups the ante of any action he gets near, slides into all connecting Pisces. And that's kind of a lead-in to what we're going to talk about today. I am so happy to have with me my best American psychic colleague, the Intuitive Prospector, Marc Lainhart. He is an award-winning, internationally respected and tested, British-trained psychic and spiritual medium and Best American Psychics 2020 Psychic of the Year. Known as the Intuitive Prospector, he hosts the Inspired Living radio show, also on OMTime Radio. His work as a radio show host, hiking guide, certified diver, metaphysical teacher, holistic healer, inspirational thought leader, certified healthcare provider, and writer is to serve, heal, guide, teach, transform, and inspire others in connecting to spirit, self, and this wonderful world around us. With his own near-death experience and several personal tragedies, Marc has spent the last several years deciphering and demystifying the sensational subject matter of death and dying, and now strives to help others from around the world tap into and flex their own intuitive muscles and abilities. And I will also add a point of privilege here. Marc and I were the top 2 shooters in laser tag at the Best American Psychics retreat a couple of years ago. Welcome, Marc. Thank you for being here.
Hi, Kathy. Thank you so much for having me on.
It's nice to return the favor. Marc has had me as a guest a time or two on his show. I would like to start. Well, both of us have a a drive to give people information that they can use and also keep them from freaking out, to see the personal benefits in various things that are going on. And I would like to start by looking at the world as it is becoming, because it's undeniable that reality has undergone some pretty significant and seemingly permanent changes in the last couple of years. When you think of our experience of reality shifting like that, what pops to mind for you?
Well, I'd say the first thing, because you do a lot of astrology and I look at numerology, which is really their cousins. They work on an ancient philosophy for guidance, and you had talked about hope. And as we move into 2022, from a numerology standpoint, the year is hope. That's what's ahead of us. And what I would like to, say to your listeners out there is we've been in this cocoon phase, and this is something I talked about 2 years ago on Inspired Living Radio when we started to look at this pandemic and the roaring 20s coming in. And we have been in this cocoon phase, and when I remind people, the caterpillar does not become the butterfly without an intense struggle and isolation in the cocoon phase. And if you think about where we've been the last 18 to 24 months, we've been in this intense struggle, even times maybe a lack of hope, transformation, where society is literally changing from a social construct to a psychological behavior to mental health, to the Great Resignation. And through that, this is where we're going to start to merge in 2022 with a year of hope, based on what the numbers are telling me, based as we start to move into space. You had opened your show with greetings, humans, and that's where we're going. We're going to be moving out into space, and there's a lot of hope that's just around the corner. Now, that's not going to say that that all of a sudden the politics and the pandemic and the sycophancy that we see going on is just going to stop. It's going to be there in 2022 as part of this shift. But I would have to say, it's the cocoon. And from nature to the spiritual pathways, everything tells me that once we start to emerge from this cocoon, things are not only get better from a healthcare standpoint, but we're going to have new perspectives, just like the butterfly has a different perspective to that of the caterpillar.
Since you mentioned cocoon, I'd like to point out that the being that enters the cocoon looks completely different from the being that's in the cocoon, and the being that comes out of the cocoon is unrecognizable based on what went in and what happened in there. So we're all changing in ways where A, there is no going back, and B, what our lives end up looking like may be unrecognizable compared to where we started a couple of years ago. You mentioned the Great Resignation. Now, your understanding of that is what is your understanding of what that?
Yeah, I would say it's an awakening. You've had, I always follow, as a numerologist, I follow data, I follow trends, I follow patterns, and there's something going on within the American society. I can't speak for the global, but here in America, you've had over 12 million people in the last 5 months resign or quit their job or start up a small business or become an entrepreneur. That just doesn't happen with those types of numbers in our history. We know that pandemics from past have created paradigm shifts where people, want a change, want more. We saw this from the 1600s with the Black Plague, and which gave rise to the American worker, that we have today with unions and a salary that's fair, and laws that protect workers. That stems from a pandemic. And when you look at the numbers of over 12 million people that are saying, I'm resigning my job, I'm worth more, I want to do something that's worth my time. I always tell people, my clients, the secret of life, because they come to me as for a psychic reading. They're like, Mark, what's my destiny, what's my future? And I always say, your future is based on today, what you plant today for the future you want tomorrow, but getting paid to do what you love. And I believe that's what we're witnessing, when people said, are we going back to normal? No, we're not going back to normal, because that normal was not working for us as a society. And the new normal is going to be transformations that, like you said, represents not being caterpillar people anymore, but being more butterfly people. And it's a great awakening that's taken place. And not everybody's going to awaken at the same time, but there's a lot of people that are saying, you know what, I want to do something different. If I'm going to get paid to do what I'm here to do on this planet while I'm here, I want to have fun doing it and have, options to do other things.
One element in this that I've identified is no longer putting up with. Like, people are realizing there were a lot of aspects of my job that really were mistreating me, and I was putting up with it because I felt like I had to. And there's sort of a what do I have to lose? I have everything to gain mentality. I am seeing this transfer over into relationship shifts right now as well. No longer putting up with. Have you noticed that?
I have. A lot of my clients have come to me, and just, not for any particular reason, just the relationship has changed, or they've changed and they no longer fit within that relationship. But yeah, this last year has been a lot of consultation on relationships and the change within people, just ending the relationships for really no reason, just want something new and going in a different direction and leaving like everything behind, if you will.
I've also seen people embrace who they really are and recognize that they were or had been keeping the peace, putting up with, not realizing that they had an option of actually stating their needs. And that's been shaking a lot of things up. I got blocked by somebody for doing that. So,
good old social media.
Oh, good old social media. But I'm seeing this with a lot of my clients too, and some connections that I never imagined would be experiencing this, but it makes sense in terms of the big picture. There are other things. There's something else you'd been predicting about. A nice way to put it would be duality, a bifurcated sense of existence. Is the Great Divide or the Great Division, is that the term for it? Do you know what I'm referring to here?
Yeah, it is, in duality, it's opposing forces, right? That's the yin and the yang, or, the angel and the devil on each shoulder. We all have this duality if we're aware of it. And I think what we're seeing in society, you could draw duality to politics, you could draw duality to this pandemic, you could draw duality to either wearing a mask and getting vaccinated, or not wearing a mask and not getting vaccinated. I think what we're seeing is just awareness, and that's the greatest agent for change, as Eckhart Tolle talks about in his book, that when we start to have awareness, there are going to be people that are aware of this duality and start going in that direction of a better way of living, safety, health, standards, believing in science and that the world is round. And what we're seeing from this duality, which has been created by social media, unfortunately, in, newscast shows that don't promote, real information. There's a lot of misinformation, a lot of disinformation. And what happens is you create, a version of the Emperor's New Clothes and a sense of duality. And, I think it's been pretty interesting to sit back these last 2 years and watch. You talked about social media and being blocked. And, I think in 2022, from what I'm seeing in the numbers, is there's going to be a big shift as part of this year of hope, where we are going to start looking at misinformation, disinformation, cognitive dissonance, and it will become a national security priority, if you will, a battle in 2022 for truth versus alternative truths, right? And I think that we're going to see a lot of responsibilities coming into 2022, people held accountable, rule of law, both criminal and civil activities that are going to take place at the highest levels of our government. And this is all going to be responsibility, and that's part of what 2022 is, which is a year of the six, because next year is the year of the six, and six is all about personal responsibility and taking care of one another. And I think people are just tired, people are burned out, and people are ready to start moving forward with information they can trust. And that's going to be part of the duality, because we're going to see people that don't want to move forward, just like we see a lot of people that do want to move forward.
It sounds like it's going to be increasingly possible to bridge the competing realities that are in existence. It's been very, I have observed the last couple of years, people with the same set of facts and spinning completely different realities out of it. And
Yeah.
some of them don't have any I mean, and each thinking the other side is completely
Is
full of
wrong.
it or misguided or
Yep.
wrong.
Yep.
So it sounds like there's a possibility here for erasing or diminishing some of that.
Yeah, and I think, we call that gaslighting and cognitive dissonance, and I think people are becoming aware of what is cognitive dissonance, what is sycophancy, what is gaslighting. And I think next year what you're going to see too is you're going to see, legislation around social media, around the internet, things like Section 230, which is based on technology, Title 47, the FCC Fairness Doctrine, what I've been talking about for 2 years, where you're going to start to see things have to be presented in a truthful light, and if they're not, then they're flagged as false or misinformation or disinformation. And social media has had a huge hand in doing that. A lot of documentaries have come out. It's been quite eye-opening to see what social media has done to our society. I just even saw an article today, of all things. It was talking about 2009, about how the internet was kind of a fad, and the internet wasn't going to really take off. And that was back in 2009, so 21 years ago? And look at where we're at with the internet today. And so there's just got to be some regulations and legislation about what is presented, just like, journalistic standards in democracy. And that's going to start to take place in 2022.
Okay. Well, I saw an article today about China setting up fake social media profiles to disseminate false information into the international social media. And with that, I see that we've hit the time for our first break. So we'll hold that thought and be back in a couple of minutes. Want help with your own celestial compass? Visit my site, empowermentunlimited.net, for Astro Insight forecasts for each week, month, and new and full moon. Want to explore the personal impact? Make a decision? Understand another person? It is possible. Click the Services tab to book a personal session with me. That address again, empowermentunlimited.net. Welcome back to Celestial Compass. We're talking today with Marc Lainhart, the Intuitive Prospector, about how the world is changing and how we're changing. And we'll get to in a bit ways that we can actively interact with that. There's one aspect we've hinted at that I know is a topic of special interest to you, Marc. It might be called the Great Reveal, but I note that in the last couple of years, the U.S. has launched a space force, and now there are private companies sending people up in rockets for a few minutes at a time, and increasing information about what the government really has been experiencing with craft that don't match what we do. What do you think has been going on or is going on with our relationship to things and peoples off this planet?
Yeah, well, as I always say, in the work we do, Kathy, is, some people call us for advice and other people call us crazy. And I've been talking about this for almost 3 years now, as far as what some would call UFOs, unidentified flying objects, UAPs, which is the official government term for unidentified aerial phenomenon. It's something that I've been talking about for a couple years, something that I witnessed myself in my days in the Coast Guard off the coast of Puerto Rico many years ago. And, it's going to tie into next year, 2022, because next year, like I said, from a numerology standpoint, is the year of the 6. And if you go to what Nikola Tesla talked about, he always said, if you only knew the magnificence of 3, 6, and 9, then you would have a key to the universe. And if you go back to the year of the 3, which is just a few years ago, we had some quite transformative times, and then we got into our roaring 20s, and now we're moving into the year of the 6, which is a universal number. And so I've been talking about that the government has officially put out a report, which has never been done before, where they've actually, had a 9-page report back in June of this year from the Pentagon. So that tells me that they are aware that something is observing us, something that technology that's farther advanced than us. It doesn't always mean little green men. It just could be, an intelligence that is observing, just like we would do if we were observing, another country. And, some call it full disclosure. Some call it the great reveal. It is interesting that over the last 2 years, we do now have a dedicated Space Force, which is the part of the Department of Defense, which was, a branch of the Air Force, became the Space Force, which the Air Force was part of the Army. When we started to have airplanes, we created the Air Force. Now we have people going to space, like you said. James T. Kirk, William Shatner just went to space and floated around for 4 minutes. But here's the interesting thing, Kathy, is once we're ready, because this has been going on, this isn't anything new. If you're, wearing your tinfoil hat with your conspiracy theories, ancient aliens has been talked about for thousands of years. Communications, technology. But what's been so interesting is how our technology has really ramped up in the last 50 to 60 years. It's a conversation we've been having for 75 years publicly, but nobody wants to talk about the technology. And if you look at some of your technology and what it does, some of the symbology on it does not look, you turn your power button on your phone and it doesn't look like a power button. It has a symbol on it, or your computer or your keyboard. And, I believe a lot of that is based on reverse engineering and our interactions with an intelligence that's far superior than we are. And of course, the listeners out there might be thinking Hollywood movies like, the UFO is going to show up on the White House lawn and blow it up and enslave the human race. I don't think it's that at all. I think it's, it's a species that has worked through its technology, it's worked through its aggression, and it's ready to reveal itself. But right now, Kathy, I don't know if I'd want to reveal ourselves to the human race with so much chaos that we have going on around our planet. But I think the most interesting thing about all of this, tying this all together, is in just a few days, the James Webb Telescope on December 24th is going to launch into space. It's a $10 billion project, so fingers crossed everything goes to plan. And it's going to go 1 million miles out, and it's going to shoot into the galaxy and see where the first moments of our galaxy were born. But through that, it's 100 times more powerful than the Hubble telescope, and it will be able to tell us if we're alone. Or not alone in the universe, be able to see, planets, possibly infrastructure. NASA's even been quoted saying within 24 hours of turning the satellite on, we may determine that there is life out there in the universe, which we all know. If you do the water test, you take, a cup of water out to the ocean and and I think we'd agree on that there's octopus and whales and dolphins and all sorts of life in the ocean. But if I dip my cup in that ocean, I'm probably not going to get a whale or a dolphin or an octopus in my cup, right? That's kind of what the universe is for us, trying to figure out how vast space is. But there is a lot of life out there. We just are not ready to have it revealed yet, or we don't have the technology to discover it. But that's about to change in 2022. So buckle up, get ready, because it is coming.
Fascinating. This is reminding me a long time ago when I lived in Houston. I went to a MUFON meeting, a Mutual UFO Network meeting, because I had a business partner who had physical evidence that things were happening to her at night. Okay, like she'd wake up with grass on her feet in the bed. At any rate, and she was not a crazy person. And we noticed that the audience, the people attending this meeting, had a real high representation from NASA, which was near where it was, the Johnson Space Center. And she explained to me that the engineers at the Space Center were looking to get information about propulsion machinery or mechanics. That's what their interest was. They weren't thinking, the Pleiadians coming to see me at night. They wanted to figure out how are they making these things move, which I thought was, okay, so there's a scientific slant to this. So who knows what we'll find. What's the date that the telescope is going up? Do you remember?
So it's all bundled up. It's in the actual rocket over in, I think it's launching from Europe, so I believe over in France, but it's slated for December 24th. It's the James Webb Telescope. That launches. They've been working on it for over a decade. It's a $10 billion project, and it's launching on the 24th. But, I go back to Carl Sagan, too, which you would love from an astrology standpoint. He always talked about, having big claims require, big evidence, to support your claims. And we know that there is phenomenon flying around that defies the laws of gravity, defies the laws of physics. It's now in a documented report from our government. We've captured it on video. It defies, just basic aerodynamics. The Wright brothers just celebrated, I think Wright Brothers Day was yesterday or the day before, since we discovered flight in, we know that there's something there. It's gone all the way up to presidents. There's been presidents have been quoted now as saying that there is something there. We're just not sure what it is. So I think that's going to reveal itself much more in 2022. And the science behind it, because you're right, the engineers want to understand, how are they traveling through the universe? How are they getting from point A to point B? What kind of, technology they're using? But you have to think bigger than that. You talked about the bigger picture, right, and what we do. Maybe we have to start talking about multidimensional beings, extraterrestrials that have the ability to bend space and time, to move through space and time, because they move so quickly. And if you've ever seen one on video, I've seen it firsthand with my own eyes. They move very fast, and that tells me they're probably using or bending dimensional space and time that Einstein talked about all the time.
I'm a big proponent of, I see popular culture preparing us or presaging a lot of things that happen. We could spend an hour and a half talking about just the original Star Trek. But what I'm immediately thinking of as you say this is the current iteration of Doctor Who. Doctor Who is a British sci-fi character that regenerates every time the actor changes. Everything changes. Well, the current Doctor Who, the 13th Doctor, is a woman. She's about to leave the series, and who knows what she'll regenerate into. But the latest storyline has her actually discovering that there is a universe outside our universe. And there is a force attempting to actually wipe out and shut down this universe and basically reboot and do something else. That's the storyline. So the concept of interdimensionality and one being able to go from one to the other is introduced into our mindset just through this. So who knows? Maybe we're all multidimensional. I wouldn't argue with that. That certainly explains what happens with inanimate objects in my life. They float in and out of dimensions.
Well, I've long, the Matrix is about, the next iteration of the Matrix is coming out here in a few days. And I always go back when I saw that movie, I'm like, that's not a movie, that's a documentary. Because for those of us that are, into astrology or numerology or psychics or mediumship, metaphysics, they've always talked about, spirituality as those that are seen before the rest of society, but what science hasn't yet caught up to. And why is it that when somebody has a vision, we've seen something and they've had an event that's life-changing, they call them insane, but religion calls that a miracle. And that would be tied right into ufology and religion go hand in hand, centuries past, which has been interesting to study. But a lot of us are seeing and having experiences that we just don't understand or can't comprehend. And that's part of the great reveal, the great awakening, not just with, ufology, but from a spiritual aspect and from a duality aspect and just waking up. And that's hard to do sometimes. Not everybody wants to wake up, right? In the Matrix, not everybody wants to be unplugged.
Very true. But circumstances have kind of forced us all to go to our room and think about things in the past couple of years. So we'll see what we find when we step out of the house after it finally lands from being in this great tornado, just to mix a whole bunch of metaphors there. So a lot is shifting. Things are shifting and they're shifting permanently in our perspective, in the way we view and experience reality, in what we are willing to have or not have in our lives, in possibly our concept of where we as a species fit in the entire universe, how do you put one foot in front of the other every day with this kind of morphing occurring on basically every front? So I have a whole list. I'm curious to hear what you think is important.
Well, let's start with the presence, right? Let's just, talk about being present with what is happening in front of you. Your focus determines your reality is a big thing that I have learned in my spiritual pathways and things that I've come to understand. And, one day at a time, we're really good as humans wanting to either suffer our past or project to a future that's not even guaranteed or is going to unfold like we want it to. And, a lot of breath work, a lot of meditations, because there's so much information coming at us as a species. I'm reading a book right now called Change, and it's about the flow of information in the last 3 years through our social media aspect, through our news channels, through our phones, through our, what we do at work and what we do at home. We're very connected, but we're more disconnected than we ever have been in our society, but we're connected on so many levels. So a lot of times, for my clients or my students or my spiritual group, I always tell them to find that balance, which is part of duality, right? Finding balance and disconnecting, taking the time to disconnect so you have time to reconnect, and it's going back to, the Star Trek reference. I always go back to 2001: A Space Odyssey and the monolith, Kubrick's monolith. What does your iPhone look like? It looks like a monolith. It looks like what was in the movie back in 1968. And that little black monolith box can connect us on so many different levels, from, wanting the latest joke to wanting to know, the history of who we are. And that's a lot to take in. It's like drinking from a fire hose. So sometimes by not doing anything, less is more. You can really be beneficial. Like I said, I do Qigong, I do meditations. I've taken this entire month off from my spiritual practice, something I started 2 years ago to get me ready for the new year and not doing any readings. And it's really been beneficial. So sometimes that might be the best action, is not to do anything at all and just enjoy the moment, enjoy what you have, have that attitude for gratitude, and, just try to be a better version than you were yesterday, and bring that into our reality so other people can benefit from that.
So I see two things in this. The first is you're describing both what the pandemic forced us into and also a benefit of the pandemic, to finally just slow down and stop doing so much, because it became impossible to run around and keep a packed schedule of being outside the house. So we've been getting training in staying in one place, especially with travel being limited for a variety of reasons. And the second thing I see in this, or the second aspect I see, is simplifying, which I think is a big coping mechanism. Just stripping things down to, what do I need in this instant? What's most important to me? And I'm seeing people view situations in their lives, objects in their lives, very differently, and getting rid of a lot of energetic clutter as a result, and simplifying and saying, and reprioritizing is an aspect of this as well, I guess, is a way of putting it, of what's most important to me. And you know what? X was fun for me when I was younger. Don't need it anymore. I'm going to go and let that drop. Bam. So going deeper, it's simplifying and going deeper in the stuff that's there. And even just being still for a minute, historically, has really frightened a lot of people. Well, I know a lot of people who've been very uncomfortable being with themselves, being alone with themselves. I knew someone who actually whipped a stick of butter into a box of powdered sugar one evening because he was forced to be by himself and couldn't stand it. That is extreme, all right? We've all been given many opportunities to be just by ourselves. And I think this has led to lots and lots and lots of changes and interesting developments. And we're butting up onto the next break. So I'm going to hold my thought and bring it back to you to see what what you think of it after the next messages. So hang in there, everybody. How would you like navigational tools you can use on your own? Visit my site, empowermentunlimited.net, and click the Shop tab. There you'll find lots of talks and guides explaining the big influences at work now, like Saturn in Aquarius and Uranus in Taurus. You'll also find a variety of guided visualizations for relaxing, clearing your energy, or getting to know planetary archetypes. That address again, empowermentunlimited.net. Welcome back to Celestial Compass. We're talking today with Marc Lainhart, the Intuitive Prospector, and we've been talking about different ways that the world has been changing and now what we can do with it and how we can live better. And we were talking about how the pandemic has encouraged so many of us to live in the moment, or even just be physically still in a way we haven't been before, and put us more in actual contact with ourselves. And I think this has opened the door. Not everyone has walked through it. It's opened the door to a lot more self-awareness and self-understanding. Have you observed that?
I have, and I just want to go back to right before the break. You were talking about that isolation, and
yes,
some folks don't want to be by themselves. And I go back to the 13th century mystic Rumi, who always talked about the more silent and still you become, the more you'll actually hear. And we know from history past that there's always going to be 30% of our population that just doesn't want to move forward, doesn't want to hear about astrology or numerology or psychic predictions. That's just part of our history. But there's a lot that have been forced, like you said, to go into this isolation period to reveal, and sometimes not, that reveal it can be quite transformative. It can, be quite life-changing. But what's been interesting to observe is a lot of discussions on mental health during this pandemic, mental health moving forward from our healthcare frontline workers to children. We're having discussions, and words matter because conversations bring awareness, and awareness brings change. So in a sense, this pandemic has revealed what it's like to go through an isolation. And just going back to 2022, because we're moving into that universal 6 year, which is a universal number, it's about accepting and assuming responsibility, right? It's about moving forward, because we've been kind of flying by the seat of our pants in 2021, right? Because 2021, from a numerology standpoint, is the year of the 5, which is freedom, love, adventure, and we've kind of had all of that. But now next year, we're going to get down to some, nuts and bolts of assuming responsibility, accepting what has happened, and start to move forward in a way that's going to bring people together, not apart. We've talked before the show about the Great Divide, and 2 years ago, I said that I see this prediction of the Great coming together. I don't know what the trigger is, or the catalyst, or the agitator that actually, it might be just this pandemic and the politics that we've seen within our country and the sycophancy for the last, 3 years. But I see overall this great coming together, and that's going to tie into the year of hope, which is right around the corner. I mean, we're literally, two weeks away from 2022, and I'm still trying to get through 2020. But it's going to be... The isolation period is going to reveal, and it's kind of like what I teach on. If there's no pressure, there's no diamond. A diamond, it starts off as a piece of coal deep in the ground, in the darkness, extreme pressures, and then it's finally unearthed by a prospector like myself, an intuitive prospector, that reveals that diamond, and it shows the beauty of that pressure. But remember, no pressure, no diamond. And all of us have felt this pressure. Maybe you've lost a loved one. I know that my family was impacted by COVID directly. Colleagues, I had a friend pass away, I had a colleague pass away. So I understand the pressures of life, but I also look forward to what those pressures can bring, because what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and we're all survivors. And at the end of this, we're going to reveal some very brilliant, clear diamonds for our society, for healthcare, for science, for space exploration. That's what I see coming for us in 2022 and beyond. Well,
that's very exciting, and it does match the astrology. And what I find fascinating, because I'm starting to write up my first forecast, my first astrological forecast for 2022, and there, along with this very diffuse, loving, gentle, let's hold hands and sing Kumbaya, Jupiter in Pisces energy, there's a lot of emphasis on what's happening here on the ground and where is it getting us. So that tells me that there's something here about bridging higher perspectives and concrete practicalities, and which is a roundabout way of saying one thing I have observed as a necessity that I think is being woven into a new way of being in the world is your own grounding and well-being, that an individual's well-being on all levels is something that goes at the top of the priority list. Many things have been pushing us for years to stop bleeding for other people and putting our own needs way at the bottom, because we're no good to anybody if we don't have any fuel in our tank, if we're running depleted. But something lately has made it, I think, all the more imperative to deal with your own well-being and stop apologizing for it. Just make it a given in your life. So that's one tactic I put very high on the list of how to deal with all this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think it's led to go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, coming back to this great coming together, because, we're going to have forgiveness for what's happened. There's going to be some amending. There's going to be some authenticity, people realizing who they are. And, I always, with all my shows I talk about, or that I'm on, I always talk about being kind, caring, and compassionate. I see that moving forward, not just for, within society. And it doesn't seem like that right now. But again, when we start to have legislation and rules around social media where, people behind a keyboard can start respecting one another and, treat others as you like to be treated, the golden rule, as we talk about in spirituality, paying it forward. I do see that, which is going to have a ripple effect on our planet too, right? Because we're not having even a conversation about what's going on the planet and what the pandemic did from a planetary scale and how the planet started healing within 30 days of humans being off the grid. That, to me, was looking back, that was phenomenal. I mean, you had dolphins swimming up the canal in Venice. You had, in India, they could see the Himalayas for the first time in 30 years because there was no smog. And I think we're going to look at some of this, what we've done, because it's been self-created by us as humans, to be like, okay, we're moving forward in a different way. Cleaner energy, sustainability. I talked about self-mastery. 2 years ago, I was having these conversations on my show, and I think we're going to start to see that unfold in 2022.
You mentioned ripple effect. And also being kind to people. I believe that every little decent, pleasant act that you commit is a ripple going into the pond, and you have no idea how far out it's going to spread. I'm a huge, huge proponent of interact. I don't like to go through self-serve checkouts. I like to deal with people with actual cashiers. I believe in being nice to them, smiling, engaging with them. I'm really nice to waiters in restaurants because their lives have been really difficult. But I've historically been extremely personable and nice, and you just never know what effect smiling at one person, particularly if they deal with the public, what impact that's going to have forever and ever and ever. So that's something you can do.
Approach.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that's something that just, people say, oh, there's just so much that's wrong with the world, I can't possibly address any of it. Yes, you can. You just emanate decency from your own little corner of it, and it affects people. It affects people.
Yeah, like I say, your focus determines your reality. You have two ways to look at it, right? You can be like, damn, that really sucked. Or you can look at it and be like, hey, damn, that really sucked. It's even just how you use your words and your focus can really determine. And I think everybody is tired, burned out, watching us go through these, pandemic transformations and moving forward. I think people are, it's almost like we talked about on the show, like you talked on Inspired Living Radio, you talked about the great reveal of pulling the curtain back. And, it's the Wizard of Oz, but it's not this big, Wizard of Oz effect. It's a guy behind the curtain. It's that type of thing that's going to happen in 2022. And people are going to be like, okay, let's get on down that yellow brick road and let's start making change.
And it's interesting you mentioned Yellow Brick Road because there is an astrological aspect in the spring that last occurred in exactly the configuration it's going to be in when L. Frank Baum was born, the man who wrote The Wizard of Oz. So, so we've got something happening that could have long-standing cultural storytelling, fantasy, allegory impact growing out of what happens next year. So that's pretty cool. Other things that people can do in the here and now, though, one thing I see that's kind of a parallel to just be nice to people is, honestly, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is to clean up your little corner of reality and get it in a good, tidy condition and let your light shine through it because it spreads to other people. And you're doing that, may give someone else the courage to do something, may simply brighten someone else's day, and the light can just spread and spread and spread and spread and spread, appropriate for it being the eve of the winter solstice as we are having this conversation. Do you have any comments on that notion?
Yeah, I'd say, the solstice starts tomorrow, right? First day of winter. And we start to get longer days, more light. I would just say to your listeners, seek out stability in 2022 because it's that year of the 6. We have 3 2s next year. 2 represents peace. The number 22, which is a master number, represents the master builder. I said Yellow Brick Road because I'm a prospector, so I'm always looking for the diamonds and the gold, anything that that makes things better. But really just, next year, seek out stability from the last 2 years and the stresses and the changes and the transformations that we've all gone through, and find a place that you can get grounded, a place to operate, leaving behind the uncertainty of the past year. Put a premium, I guess, on building a firm foundation because the master builder number is the 22. That's what it represents in numerology. And, I have to say that there's something to astrology. There's something to numerology. It's something I started to look at when I started to have my own awakening, which wasn't easy. But we're going back to, 4,000 years, 11,000 years, depending on, what research you do on history of what we're doing and forecasting. But I have to say 2022 is going to be a more stable year. I know it doesn't seem like that now, but for those of us that see, just like, the gentleman who wrote Star Trek, he was a seer. He wrote things out before they happened, Gene Roddenberry. And I see good things coming for 2022. It's not the end of the world. And we're going to start to see some stability, especially in the spring, moving into summer. We'll start to see things start to stabilize and, move in a more positive aspect.
So I would encourage people also to look at what can you do with your time? Now that you are here, here's the situation of your life. What can you objectively, concretely, practically do? And I would throw in, how about having some fun? Like, why are we alive? We're not just worker bees. We aren't just toiling. What's the point of what you've gone through if you aren't doing something every day or experiencing something every day that makes you glad that you woke up and you're still on this planet?
Exactly. And I would just say, Kathy, too, because there's 3 2s next year. 2 is the number of duality, right? If the split we perceive between the light and the dark, the inside, the outside, the yin, the yang, the masculine and the feminine, the good and the bad, life and death, mind and heart, and so on. But this is going to be a year of balance and duality, because the number 2 also represents harmony. And when we're in balanced, it can be quite a joyful year. But if we're not balanced, the number 2 can also be destructive. So we want to use the year of duality, like you were just saying, and find some time to do the things that you've always wanted to do, and take that time to disconnect so you can have the time to reconnect for what is important to you, not what others want for you and not what others think you should be doing, but what's right for you, and finding your authentic self and finding that diamond within.
I know some creatives who have reclaimed their schedule absolutely for themselves and drawn very tight boundaries and been incredibly protective of their time and had massive creative output during this time. And didn't Shakespeare write a lot of his plays during the plague? I mean, there are people who have created enormously out of this, and you may not think of yourself as a creative sort, but next spring, don't be surprised if all kinds of special, beautiful, otherworldly ideas start flowing through you, which could be lots of fun.
And that's why we're here, right? To have fun. Fun.
Well, there's got to be some
like
point
this show.
again.
This has been fun.
Well, good. I'm glad. It has been fun. Now, so tell people all the 20 zillion places where they can find you, because there are a lot of them.
Oh my goodness. Well, for any prospector out there, looking for your own spiritual goal, just go to marclainhart.com, internet search the Intuitive Prospector. You can find me on so many different, from Insight Timer to here on OMTime Radio for my podcast, to my latest article coming out on West Side Seattle, Best American Psychics, Best Psychic Directory. I'm pretty easily found nowadays. Sometimes when I just want to hide, I don't want to be found as much anymore. But I would say marclainhart.com for all my upcoming events and to book into 2022. And
your radio show is Inspired Living Radio, and it's on Wednesdays. Is that correct?
Yeah, Inspired Living Radio. We're going to be back for our 7th season, starting in 2022, Wednesdays at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, and we're now streaming through all of your favorite podcasting platforms, which has been fun. And I love doing it because, again, this gives us an opportunity, Kathy, to create platforms of positivity and use that ripple effect, like you talked about, to move that forward while we're here and long after we're gone.
Thank you so much, Mark, and everybody. Look for my forecasts at OMTimes and at empowermentunlimited.net. I'll be back in 2022. Happy holidays and Happy New Year, everyone.